One of the things that's interesting about this new film is it's focused on George Orwell, obviously his pen name. And this is about his effort, in a way, to acknowledge whatever comforts you might have and then come outside of yourself
Yes,
to be political. Tell me a little bit about how you came to Orwell as a subject.
as somebody who's born in Haiti, who has known what dictatorship means, who have seen his parent whispering in the living room because they didn't want me to hear certain thing. My father was lost his job as a scholar in the faculty of agronomy in Haiti the next day of the election. We were witness of that kind of abuse and from the state itself, from the political leadership. And nobody would have thought that something like this would happen in the United States, where this is a country that always felt like above all the other countries of the world who wanted to be like the sheriff of democracy around the world, even though we know that's not the reality, because that very same dictatorship I'm talking about in Haiti, like the Duvalier regime, who stayed, father and son, who stayed more than 35 years in power, but they were able to stay that long because they were supported by every single U.S. administration.
One of the things that you're drawing attention to, though, is how these ideas would have shaped you as an artist. I mean, first of all, and I don't want to be presumptuous, but like you very much understand the power of words, language, images. And how do you think about a term like propaganda? And how has that changed kind of before and after this project, 2 plus 2 is 5?
The importance of word, the importance of, we are all humans, we are, um, you know, we are impressionable, and especially if the words come from the state itself, from leaders themselves. So if we don't know anymore what is the truth or what is a fake, and we are in the middle of that, it's impossible to see through. Orwell discovered something very early on, the significance of language, and being in the democracy, being even in a society, is that particular group agree that certain words mean certain thing.
And it's funny, in my line of work, I feel sometimes right at the little catalyst point of those kinds of things where I'll watch a talking point, a political talking point, which is even the term we use just for the propaganda that is brought to the various parties for the purpose of spreading it. Okay,
Yeah,
just to try and use it in a neutral term. And now all of a sudden you're trying to have a conversation with someone who is using those terms. And you're in this battle of interjecting the facts, but now you're arguing, and now it looks like it's something that is an argument instead of something that is a case of a fact and not a fact.
exactly.
And it feels very much what I appreciate about a doc is in a documentary, you can have that conversation with a kind of clarity that sometimes it feels like I'm in an informational fog of war.
Yeah, but there is something that we can call the truth, even a mathematical truth. That's why we call the film 2 plus 2 equal 5, because we have a number of people who wants you to believe that 2 plus 2 equal 5, and who can get you confused. Because when it's a voice of authority who comes on TV and tells you, you know what, as of today, 2 plus 2 equal 5. And by the time you start to understand, wait a minute, that's not what I remember. And the time is gone, and you're already submerged
Yes.
by what you call the propaganda, basically.
Submerge is a good word.
Yeah, and
It
and
does feel like the water is
it's a,
rising
that
sometimes.
was the plan. Let's flood the zone. That was the original plan. So Orwell has a phrase for that. And it's really a good phrase to think about when he said the degradation of language is the condition for the degradation of democracy, you know. And this is what we
Wait, so
have
let me
been
say that again. The degradation of language is the condition for the
for,
degradation of democracy.
yes. So that means it starts there with language, you know. It's incredible, but it's simple. And we have seen, and that's the other thing. Sometimes I have discussion with colleagues and friends. It didn't start with Donald J. Trump. We have seen that degradation, and unfortunately, the press have been somehow complicit with it. Sometimes knowingly, sometimes not knowing it.
Yeah. Can I
You know,
challenge this for a second? Because
yeah.
one of the things I've wrestled with is particularly for American press, even Western press, as you're talking about, things like propaganda, yellow journalism, they're from way earlier in the century, right?
Yes, of
When
course.
and that wasn't truly a fact-based time in a lot of ways. And
Yeah,
even
but
with
but there were resistance, and it
there
came around,
was
and there
exactly.
were regulations.
But
There
there's
were,
something
yeah.
about Watergate also that sort of taught American journalists and taught a generation that here's what's going to happen. There's going to be a revelation in which you will reveal a truth. And when that truth is heard all across the land, there will be politicians and average people who will say, aha, the truth, and they will act. That
Yes,
feels broken to me. That feels like
yes.
now we're in a scenario where something might be revealed and someone else will say, well, that's not true. Or is it? And now and it's just you're in a cycle now. And
Yeah.
it's really broken and it feels like we are not prepared to deal with it. And I don't mean for you to be my therapist, Raoul Peck,
No,
as a journalist, but do you know
but
what
it's
I'm saying?
true.
Like it's
It's true.
something that we were raised to know, reveal, action will follow. And that being broken, I feel like has left a lot of journalists struggling with, well, what are you for?
Well, but you have to go at the bottom of that. When did it start and why? It started first, Bourdieu says in the film, basically journalists have become puppets. Not that they don't think, but they are in a system that they don't control. I'm old enough to have gone through those phases.
But I do
And
think there's
from
something to
there,
be
it
said
went
for
to the
creating some
worst.
sort of entertainment. I mean, I'm watching your
Exactly.
documentary, right? And your documentary feels like a social media feed.
Hmm.
It has the cutting and the energy and the moving from here's an image from Gaza, here's an image from Burma, here's an image. It is you are also using the native tongue of our
Well,
modern technology.
yes, but differently because I'm making a film for a theatrical audience. I'm not making a film for the internet. I'm making a film that allows you thinking time. I'm not bombarding you with images. There is a very strong text played by an incredible actor, in that case, Diamond Lewis. And I make sure in the way I edit this film to leave space for you to think. There are moments where it's calm.
You had access to i- manuscripts, letters, photos. So we are hearing the narrator of this film, in a way, is Orwell himself. His ideas are what guide us, even though they are performed by an actor. How did you decide then what clips to use? Because it really goes all over the place. I mean, modern things in the 80s, things in the 40s, and as you were listening to his words, I don't know which came first, but how did you start to think about the images that would do what he said, expose a lie?
Well, the I would say the method to work like this with an incredible body of work, I learned the hard way with my film. I am not your Negro. So in this case, I learned very much quicker how to do it. And what I did is basically I had to find my libretto, the text first. That's where I start. I don't start with images. I start with the text because I am Orwell in that sense. For me, it was clear that Orwell had to tell the story himself. You can't have more impactful and stronger connection when it's the author himself who is telling the story. And that was also my learning process with Baldwin. You can't top Baldwin
Yeah.
telling the story himself.
Yeah.
How good you are. So I knew I could risk that with Orwell as well, and that's when I went throughout his work and start putting a story together, because I don't do, contrary to what some people think, that I don't, just put clips one after the other. No, there is a very clear story I'm telling. In that case, that was the story of a man in his 40s who knows he's going to die and is struggling to finish his novel. That's the simple bottom line story. And that story, of course, enabled me to digress and go everywhere in his work, to use everything else he've said, he wrote, and or lived through. It's an indirect biography. I don't do biography, because a biography, you can watch it once and that's it.
Yeah.
But a film like this one, you can watch it multiple times, because you will discover different thing each time you see. I leave different layers of storylines. Some are easy to see, and others are, needs more time for you to sometimes to understand. So the text is always the key, and the story. I'm telling a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, so that I don't lose my viewer, and everything else participate in that what I would call orchestration, with many different instruments, the music, the graphics, the sounds, every different sound that we work through. Nothing in this film is just random.
Obviously, this film has been in the works for some time, but as a news reporter, I have been covering, for instance, the way the Trump administration has been approaching the defense secretary's job. Okay, it's the Department of Defense. Now it's called the Department of War.
It's directly out of 1984.
War is peace, and
War
in the version we hear, peace is strength.
Yeah.
Hearing these very sort of blunt rewrites to reorient Americans towards a different idea has been kind of, frankly, jarring for a lot of people. And I was wondering if you've had any moments like that yourself, just in the last week or two, where you
Well,
heard and thought, oh,
I
this
can
feels
tell you
familiar.
the big part of my life, but also the last 4 years where we have been working on this film. And at one point, we had to stop following the actuality, because it's unending. We had every day more example, but I knew that more efficient was to make a film that would stay whatever the time. And in fact, in my mind, I thought the film would be finished when Kamala Harris would be president. And even if Kamala Harris was president, this film would have been as important as it is today.
Say
Because
more.
that's the thing. We cannot just see the big bully and
Hmm.
ignore where it came from. It's the same that Orwell analyzed. Orwell went through that.
Mm.
He was working at the BBC during the war. So he knew, he said, in a very humorous way, because I like that his humor at time, where he said, well, I think while working at the BBC, the propaganda was less idiotic than it could have been, than it was. He's very conscious
He is. He's
of,
very
of what's
self-aware.
going on. Yeah,
Like
he's
very
self-aware.
self-aware.
So the toolbox that he basically analyzed, it's the exact same toolbox. When he say that, well, we are always in a hurry to see what the others are doing to us, but we refuse to see what we are doing to the others. And he had, and without bothering to see the arguments, and we are in the middle of that.
You talked about the idea of if those in power push one door, they're going to push another. What do you see in the response or lack of response in the communities that are dealing with this, or even our culture writ large?
Well, that's one of the impact of all those movements, is that it creates fear. It creates personal fear, because you feel very lonely, you feel alone, because they detach you from your group, from your reference. That's a human behavior, to say, oh my God, they came to take my neighbor, but I'm fine so far. you know and and not going to the neighbor and say, neighbor, what can we do together? And unite your neighbors and say, I don't want them to come next week and do that to all of us. The civil rights movement, what was it? It was people coming together, churches, not only black, Jewish communities, white communities, students, intelligence, academia, sample people, garbage union. It was the whole society, or part of the society, deciding we're not going to accept more, and we have to find a way to do it. And I was reminding students, I was at Yale, I was at Columbia talking to students. I said, that generation, your age, they were willing to go to the South knowing they were risking their lives. And some of them did die. Some of them were arrested, tortured, and killed. You know, and we don't remember our own history. Where citizens started to sit down together and talk, because there is no response that will just come up like this. We need to make sure that we understand each other, and that we are taking that risk together, and to say it stop, and then let's rewind the statu quo. Let's go further and make sure that this will never happen again.
You're raising the question of where is, for instance, Black leadership, or when you maybe also women's groups, when you're talking about the idea that there has been a kind of erasure of gains and civil rights for these communities. What do you mean, and who do you think could be speaking up that isn't?
As an example, even the words are eliminated. You know, one of the first things they did, you cannot use, I don't know the number, maybe 300 or 400 words. You cannot use them. They took them down from official website.
Like diversity, equity,
Diva-
or inclusion are
Everything.
probably
Yeah,
some good
the most
examples. Yeah.
absurd. It sounds innocent. It's even sound ridiculous. But that's play with your minds, you know? And so that's a regression, you know and some people think it's, well, I've heard that argument, well, it's the return of the balance, like, yeah, we will catch up in the midterms or the next day. No, that's unprecedented. It's not, return to the status quo. It's already impossible. And by the way, I've been in government. I know what it means to destroy, because I know how long it takes to have a law vote, how much discussion, how many commission, etc. It takes you 3, 4, 5 years to change a law, and now in one decree, it's gone. And you are destroying everything that have taken decades to establish. So people should understand what's going on. It's not a game. It's not funny. It's not everyone, wherever they are, journalists, scholar, they have to understand they have their jobs, but they are also citizens. They are part of the civil society. So, and the civil society as such need to give a response, because I don't think that the majority of Americans are agree with what's going on.
One of the things I have heard, particularly from conservative voices, sounds a lot like this. Democrats and progressives and liberal people have engaged in their own kind of thought policing and groupthink. And you hear this even most frequently around the conversation around trans rights. That the idea of saying that this is a man, not a woman, is saying 2 + 2 = 5. And I'm not, this is not my belief,
Yeah,
but I hear it very frequently that there was a group of people out there who felt like they were responding to a kind of thought policing that was being imposed on them, particularly from civil rights advocates in various areas. How do you hear that criticism given, what you've studied the last few
yeah.
years?
Well, that's usual the same thing. By the way, the people who are saying that, uh, it's the excuse, because even though it might be true, because every movement have moments of exaggeration. That's how it goes. If the feminists did not make noise, there would have never been change. That's how change goes. There are always a group, and usually smaller group, who are much more radical than the bigger group. But if you try now to choose that radical group as an excuse to erase everything, your agenda is a totally different agenda, you know. And by the way, when you see how long it took to black people to get change, that same people have been saying, "Oh, you have to be patient." You know, I would agree with you. Yes, there are. The whole thing with putting in every email, he, hers, them. I didn't do that because I feel, you know, that's not how I am. I'm very progressive, and I respect each individual, but I don't have to obey to any injunction. My work speak for me.
And I ask because now you have groups like I remember I think it was the think tank Third Way. I'm not sure, but came out with a list of words that they said, Democrats, you should really stop using these words. These
Mhm.
alienate the voters. And that battle over language came back to me again as I was watching the film.
Yeah. Well, indeed, it's a battle, but you have to ask yourself, what is the result you are looking for? Are you looking for every person to accept the thinking behind it, or you just need the fake surface of it? It's like you're obliging people to do certain things without those people even understanding why. It doesn't make sense. In fact, you're going to create more enemy to your cause. That's not very intelligent. And there are people sometimes on the radical side who are really drunk of their power, drunk by the fact that, oh, they find that this is change, this is progress. Yes, but progress, you have to bring the whole society with you. It's not progress for your little tribe. you know it has to be wider, and it's not about aggressing people. you know
Yeah. And we're in this moment where we have ICE, customs enforcement, landing in cities with the support of the military. And so we're actually starting to see action on the ground. And it is easy in a way to hear those justifications for that action. Well, there was a riot here, all of the ways that you can kind of rationalize something that maybe doesn't quite feel right.
yeah. My colleague and co-producer Alex Gibney was saying yesterday at a Q&A. He went to Russia to make a film on Navalny. And he said, at one point, he went through, on both sides, there were agent, police. Their badge were covered with black tape, and they had a mask. And he said he remembers saying to himself, "Oh my God, this would not be possible in the United States." You know, and this is what a lot of people are experiencing every day. People with their names, erased, with mask, with no real identity, and just take you in a car and bring you to a prison. So this is how quick things can change. I'm sure a lot of Americans never thought that you would see that in the streets of America. And I remember coming to DC recently, and there were 4 armored cars at the train station. But for me, it meant something else, because I remember when there is a coup d'etat, you start seeing tanks everywhere, militaries in the streets. And that, a lot of people in the world understand that language. And to see it happening here, to turn soldiers to make partisans out of them, and they turn their rifle toward your own population, this is scary. When it happened elsewhere, this is a clear sign that something is wrong here. And if you ask the military themselves, I don't think they feel at ease. Their whole training is against that. They are not trained to turn their rifle toward people that, or maybe the parents or their colleagues. That's totally absurd. So that's we shouldn't play with that. It's not a game, it's not a rehearsal, it's reality. you know 2 + 2 = 4.
Well, Raoul Peck, thank you so much for taking the time out to talk to me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was great to talk to you.